Step 001/11, open file. 0511, The Liar. Date of birth unknown, unknown descent, unknown origin, unknown gender. Incredibly difficult to identify. Single identifying mark is a small scar on left temple, usually hidden by hair. Generally appears as a wealthy woman in lavish outfits. Primary disinformation entity within the Foundation. Oversees teams that maintain cover stories and nestic supply. Supposed connection within the gargantuan aquatic entity in the Bay of Bengal. Possible reality-bending properties, extremely dangerous. Notably, no records seem to exist of the appointment of 0511, unlike all other members who are either chosen by 051 or voted onto the council after the death and non-recovery of one of their colleagues. 0511 seems to have simply appeared on the council one day. Decryption complete. Access log. Chapter 3. The Grand Illusion. Then. This, the man at the front of the room said, revealing a slide covered in many colored dots, is the universe. Everything that ever has been, or will ever be, that we can reach, is on this slide. So far as we know, this is it, the entire sum of existence. He turned off the projector, and for a moment the room was dark. When the light came back on, the image was a painting of the earth, as if taken from above and far away. This is us, obviously, the man said, centering the slide. Nearly every living thing that we're aware of has been born and died on this rock. He paused for effect. Not such bad real estate, really. He adjusted the slide again as the audience attempted meager laughter. And this is an atom, or at least a representation of one. Technology hasn't caught up yet to where we can see these little guys, but we've got a pretty good idea about what they might look like. Now the atom is a building block, the very most basic particle in the universe, or rather it might be. There may be particles even smaller than that, and smaller particles that compose those. It's difficult to say where this ends, but at the bottom of this has to be something fundamental, right? Something that doesn't just comprise the other building blocks, but necessitates their being. That's what we were searching for. The lights came back up, and the man turned around. His white jacket bore the name Felix Carter, Ph.D., in blue lettering. His round glasses sat perched atop a red nose, and his gray hair was combed neatly onto the side. When we approached the International Academy of Existential Sciences, we came with a single goal: discover the reason why. We weren't asked to provide an explanation or deduce why the reason why. Our task was to find the part of the universe that determines why we are what we are. Today I'm happy to announce we have done this. He extended his arm, and another man came into view. This man was tall, with cropped brown hair and a blue jacket. He smiled and waved politely at the enthusiastic applause and stood with his hands clasped in front of him as he was introduced. This is Dr. Frederick Williams of the Royal Scientific Conservatory. It was with his assistance and financial backing that we made this breakthrough discovery. The two of them paused as the lights dimmed again, and the projector above produced an image. The image was faint and full of static, but its focal point was clear. A single white line extending across the image, fading at both ends. What you're looking at here is a thread, Dr. Carter continued. We've only just started calling them that. We had no idea what they would look like when we started. We were able to get this thread to manifest itself using a series of high-energy pulses directed at a tiny piece of Ozymandium film. This method was borrowed from Dr. Adam Bright and his team in the United States, who have been working on a similar project in the hopes of eliciting what they're calling tachyons and the fundamental building block of time, as it were. We discovered that by tuning our equipment just so, we were able to make something that shouldn't happen. The image changed. On the next slide, a nearby structure is seen being pulled dramatically towards the center of the thread. On the next, the thread is gone, and the building is crumpled and misshapen. this was what we witnessed. By causing one of these threads to appear for just an instant, one of these elements of the foundation of the universe, and then manipulating it ever so slightly, we increased gravity in the region by nearly 7,000% in an instant. I will say that again, we have manipulated the physical laws of the universe using a bright light and a rock. The assembled audience applauded again. After a moment, Dr. Carter held up a hand for quiet. The full manifest of our research will be available shortly, as soon as our sister projects have finished their studies. In 3 months' time, we'll present our findings in full to this assembly and take our first steps toward a more knowledgeable future. In the lobby of the auditorium afterwards, Dr. Williams stood speaking to a group of researchers alongside Dr. Carter and his team. 2 men approached him, and one of them stuck out his hand. "Dr. Williams," the man said, "absolutely a pleasure to meet you. Vincent Arians, Oxford. I've been fascinated with your work, truly." The taller man smiled. "Mr. Arians, of course. Always nice to meet a fellow alumni." He looked towards the second of the two. "And your friend?" "Aaron Siegel," the man said, following Arians' handshake with his own. "Cornell." Dr. Williams' eyes grew slightly wider. "The renowned physicist." "I dare say I half expected you to make this discovery before we did, Dr. Siegel." Aaron smiled. "Unfortunately, our work as of late has taken a different turn. If we were going to solve atomics, we should have done what you did and figured out the geometry first. Your results have been very impressive." Dr. Williams' eyes were pensive. "Yes, Dr. Carter has done some exceptional work. It's a shame he's going to be discredited. He really has put so much into this project." Arians did a double take. "Wait, he what?" Before either of them could say anything else, they were approached by a dark-eyed woman, slight, with short black hair and a blue dress, with long black gloves. She came up behind Dr. Williams and put a hand on his shoulder and whispered in his ear. He nodded. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm being called away." He stopped mid-turn. "Oh, please forgive me, Mr. Arians. Dr. Siegel, this is Dr. Sophia Lex. She's been working closely with Dr. Carter and the rest of our team here." Aaron smiled softly and nodded. "Sure." Aaron nodded back while Arians continued to process what he had just heard. Williams fiddled with his pocket for a moment and then produced a white card with a 3-arrowed emblem on it. "This is my card, Dr. Siegel," he said. "Have your office call this number here while you're still in the city and we'll arrange a proper meeting. Mr. Arians, you are certainly welcome to join as well. Our organization is on the very precipice of some truly inspiring work, and we're looking for the brightest minds to lead us." He shrugged. "Something to think about. Until later, gentlemen." Dr. Williams donned his cap and coat and followed Dr. Light out of the parlor. Now, once upon a time, a man awoke to find he had no memory of who he was or how he had gotten here. Olivia snuck out to the studio's balcony and plucked the pale, slim cigarette out from behind her ear. She was fishing in her pocket for a lighter when she heard the door behind her slide open. "You know those things kill you?" Anthony Wright did not look like the sort of man who was accustomed to a suit and tie. He wore them as if they were prison fatigues. "I should know," he added, showing her a half-empty pack of gum. "Anthony!" Olivia's slim figure slipped up against him with the grace of a small, elegant knife. She wrapped her arms around him and hugged him tight. Despite having kicked the habit 5 years ago, the old man still managed to smell like tobacco. Anthony dropped an enormous arm around her and gave her a comforting pat. They ended up leaning against the banisters side by side. It wasn't quite morning, yet below them, the city streets were cast in a tangerine glow. A cool, lethargic breeze drifted past them, carrying the ocean's scent. "I'm glad you made it," Olivia told him. She finally pulled out her lighter. It was a cheap hunk of neon green plastic she had picked up on the way to the exhibition. After a few swipes of her thumb, it only managed to spit out sparks. "Heh." Anthony plucked the lighter out of her hands as if he was taking away a dangerous toy. He produced his own. It was an old, tarnished thing made of brass. It had more dents in it than he did. "And I wouldn't miss this for the world, lady, even if it is Seattle." Olivia rolled her eyes. Anthony's lighter produced a flame on the first flick. She dipped her head down to bring her cigarette to the fire's tip. Spare me. I know you think this is all artsy-fartsy crap. Well, alright, I can't say I get the Madonna made out of cottage cheese. Olivia gave him a look. You don't like it? Anthony did a brief double take. Wait, that one's yours? She grinned. No, I'm kidding. That one's shit. The guy who made it is a hack. She turned back to the city, taking a long drag. When she exhaled, wisps of smoke whirled up from her nostrils and licked at the bottom of the balcony overhead. How's Calvin? Doing good. He told me to tell you he's sorry you couldn't come, but busy, I know. I know. Olivia closed her eyes. There's just so much going on now. Yeah, I don't think any of us really expected. Anthony's voice trailed off. They needed the accountant more than we realized. Once they lost him, they lost all their funding. Everything just started unraveling. Personnel started packing, sites started collapsing. 2 overseers ended up dead that night. Something tugged at the back of Olivia's mind. Something she was forgetting. How many sites are left now? Still about 200. We decommissioned Sat 173 last week. Nothing in it but corpses and cockroaches. He shook his head. Just ordinary cockroaches. Olivia turned to him. For the first time in a long while, he looked old and tired. The wrinkles in his face were carved deep into his skin. His eyes were surrounded by dark, impenetrable circles. She felt that tug again. How are you holding up? It's funny, Anthony told her, still watching the city. You spend your life fighting demons, putting out fires, thinking this is the hard part. This is the work that needs doing. This is the work that will kill you. But it's not. His eyes met hers, sweeping up the ashes, putting shit back together again. That's the hard part. She frowned. The tugging was harder now. Don't get me wrong, things are better now. He gave her a weary smile. We don't have to hurt people. We don't have to kill people. We don't have to mutilate children to hold back the nightmares. His eyes drifted back to the city. Olivia closed her eyes. Anthony, I don't know how the hell we did it, but we won. The world's still messed up. When I go to sleep, I still have nightmares, you know? But every night it gets a little better. The nightmares are losing. She reached into her pocket and searched for something, pulling it free. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just ranting. Listen, Olivia, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Olivia slammed all 4 inches of the sleek razor-sharp crafting knife into Anthony Wright's heart. For one instant, the old man's eyes were filled with raw confusion and shock. Then, stumbling back, numbly clutching at the hilt, his eyes were filled with nothing at all. I'm sorry, Olivia whispered. She pushed him over the banister's edge, and the world ended. Now, suddenly a voice spoke to the man. Your second wish has been granted. Now for your third and final wish. Up, come on, wake the hell up. Slivers of light squeezed through Olivia's eyelids. She felt a constant buzzing in her ears. Someone was tugging at her arms. Wake up, wake up! She popped her eyes open and immediately regretted it. Sharp, jagged sunbeams rushed into her pupils, forcing her to squint. Olivia squeezed one fist into her left socket and started rubbing away. What? Where am I? The man stopped shaking her and slumped down into a chair. Oh, thank God. Olivia kept rubbing at her eye, letting her vision adjust. She was laying back on a bed inside of a cheap motel room. The overpowered AC rumbled to her left. Above it, sunlight streamed in past the curtains. The room smelled faintly of coconut oil. Adam was seated beside the bed. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His laptop was sitting on the nightstand with a pistol laid out next to it. Olivia blinked her way through the grogginess. Adam, how much do you remember? Olivia squeezed her eyebrows together. They grinded like cogs in some enormous adding machine. She tried to think her way through the events that had led her here. The last thing she remembered was, I was having some sort of dream. Anthony was there, but it was years from now. It was all wrong. Not real. It felt real, but... Adam nodded. Something was off, right? Yeah. Olivia closed her eyes and coaxed the dream out from its hiding place in her subconscious. He wasn't smoking, but he had a lighter. We were in Seattle, but we could smell the ocean. And the more I thought about it, the more you realized it was a lie. She nodded and opened her eyes. Adam was focused on his laptop. I don't know how, but somehow I realized the only way out of it was to... Yeah. Adam cut her off. He was taking great pains to not make eye contact with her. I know. Olivia frowned, sitting up on the bed. Adam, do you, want to talk about... It's fine. We're out of it now. He was pulling a file up on the computer. You don't remember how we got here, right? Olivia shook her head. No. Same here. Luckily, I think we planned for this. He double-clicked something. The laptop screen was filled with the still image of Calvin's face. His stoic expression stared out at them. Behind him, they could see what looked like an office. Calvin loaded a video on Alexandra, along with instructions to play it if we found ourselves, not remembering anything about how we got here. Olivia scooted forward to sit on the edge of the bed beside Adam. He clicked play. A window popped up over the video, requesting 2 passwords. Over one was the name Adam, over the other was the name Olivia. It's encrypted? Olivia asked. She frowned, staring at the screen. I guess. I don't remember. I mean, there's a password I might have used, Adam said, typing something under his name. As soon as he hit enter, his name turned green. He glanced back at her. Olivia bit down on her bottom lip, thinking. Olivia? Something tugged at the back of her mind. Without stopping to think, she snatched Adam's pistol off the nightstand and buried 3 rounds directly into his skull. And then the world ended. Now. Olivia? Olivia opened her eyes. She was laid back on a cot inside of a small, comfortable-looking office. There was a bookcase stuffed full of leather-bound volumes. In front of it, there was a wide, polished desk. Calvin was standing over her. He looked distant. When didn't he? But his expression carried a hint of concern. Olivia immediately slammed her knee up into his solar plexus. Calvin buckled. Crouching forward, she rolled off the cot and stumbled under the desk, fumbling for the hidden latch under one of the drawers. Olivia had been in this office 100 times before. If memory served, there was a hidden space right here. By the time Calvin had managed to catch his breath, Olivia was pointing the pistol straight for his heart. Calvin raised his hands up and took a step back. Olivia. Shut up. She narrowed her eyes. Let me think. Calvin said nothing. Someone's messing with my head. I've gone through 2 iterations now. One with Anthony, one with Adam. Each time they were trying to get information from me, she said, talking her way through it. Each time I realized there was something wrong. A detail out of place. Anthony's lighter, Adam's computer. He calls it Alexander, not Alexandra. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized... Calvin started to lower his hands. Olivia, listen. I said shut up, she snapped back. All right. Each time, it all started unraveling once I realized something was wrong. Each time I realized the only way to escape was to... Her breathing quickened. Calvin took another step back. I have to kill you, she whispered. Olivia, just take it easy. Let's talk this through, all right? I have thought this through. Anthony, Adam, now you. You're just another dream. Another... She pursed her lips. Lie. The liar. You're the liar. Olivia. Calvin's tone took on a building urgency. Please listen to me. You might be right. Someone might be messing with your head, but it's not me. I'm not the liar. Then how the F? Her finger curled tighter around the trigger. Listen, just listen, okay? You were helping me with research. You fell asleep in my office. Now you wake up and you've pulled a gun on me. Calvin kept his arms held high. You said these things unraveled when you noticed something wrong. Have you? Olivia scowled. Not yet, but... Her eyes traced their way through the office. It all looked like it was supposed to. Unlike the previous 2 dreams, this was all familiar to her. But did that mean... You said it started with a dream about Anthony, then Adam. Think about it. If I were the liar, would I really start with Calvin next? Olivia's breathing slowed. Nothing was out of place. Nothing felt off. Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is a pattern, Calvin told her. I think the liar is trying to trick you into killing me. Her grip on the trigger loosened. You said he was trying to get information from you. What kind of information? With Anthony, I don't know. He said he needed to ask me something. With Adam, it was a password, I think, but a password? Olivia lowered the pistol but kept a firm grip. Yeah, she forced herself to breathe slowly. Okay, just give me a second, okay? Calvin slowly lowered his hands but kept his distance. Alright, but yeah, this doesn't make any sense. You don't know any password the liar would want. He didn't ask you about anything else? He paused, then added, he didn't ask you about your copy of the journal, right? You still have it? Olivia shook her head. No, he didn't. Yeah, I still have it. She reached with her free hand to touch the base of her wrist. The faint, familiar lump was still present. The journal's right here. The liar smiled. So it is. And then the world ended. Now. Funny, the voice laughed, granting the man's final wish. That was the first thing you asked for. Olivia's mouth felt like it was coated in a thin layer of dissolving chalk. It left the faint flavor of peppermint lingering on her tongue. She forced her eyes open, then immediately closed them. Bright, glaring lights beamed straight down into her retina. The throbbing pressure behind her temple intensified. She was in a hospital room somewhere. Olivia didn't even need to look around to know that. She could just feel it. She hated hospitals. Counting backwards from 10, she eased her eyes open and gave them time to adjust. Yep, it was a medical facility, all right, and she was strapped down to the bed. Good times. Several pieces of sterile, complicated equipment were placed next to her. Most of them were making beeping noises. She lifted her head as high as the nylon straps allowed, trying to get a lay of the land. A nurse and a doctor laid face down on the floor. Pools of crimson crept out from under them. An older woman in an immaculate white suit was seated nearby. She held a gun. Her gaze was on Olivia. Olivia blinked. She was wrong. It was a young man with a neon green mohawk. He wore a studded jacket splattered with something wet. In his left hand he clutched a blood-soaked switchblade. She blinked again. It was a person of indeterminate gender. Their skin was a deep shade of ochre, with a face full of piercings. They wore several leather straps around what looked like a charcoal binder. Instead of a knife, they held an aluminum baseball bat. It was coated with clumps of hair and meat. She blinked again. A man with teeth like serrated steak knives and claws that could carve through steel. She blinked again. It was Anthony. She blinked again. It was Adam. She blinked again. It was Calvin. She blinked again. It was the liar. How's that cut feeling? Olivia looked down at her wrist. A fresh series of stitches crisscrossed over a recently opened wound. It extended from the base of her palm to nearly the inside of her elbow. A distant memory tugged at the back of her mind. She licked her lips and lied. It doesn't hurt that much. Still, make sure to keep it covered. Antibiotics, too. The left side of the liar's mouth twitched upward. They would have prescribed something for it, but I'm afraid I killed them before they had the opportunity. Who? Olivia's eyes fell to the figures on the floor. What's going on? Who are they? They worked for me, and we captured you, the liar told her. You were brought to me for processing, to discover what you knew, to determine if you had the journal, or at the very least, if you knew what was in it. Their lips pursed with amusement. You know, after all this time I had forgotten it ever existed. When the agent who penned it defected and told us what it contained, you'd have thought we might have taken steps to make its contents untrue, but we are nothing if not creatures of habit. Olivia couldn't remember anything after they killed the accountant. The liar must have noticed her confusion. You've been amnesticized. Several times, actually. Did you know that's my primary function within the Foundation? To maintain the veil? To make sure no one remembers anything they're not supposed to? They tapped the weapon against their thigh. And, of course, to replace those gaps with convincing lies. Why am I still alive? Why are we even having this conversation? Because you and your friends accounted for this. Because you did have the journal. Or at least a small piece of it. A subdermal flash drive located under your wrist. I don't understand. The liar smiled. Although Olivia could no longer recognize their features, she could still make out the weariness in their face. Not all cognito hazards are anomalous, The code phrase flashed through Olivia's mind. It was as if she had just found the piece of a puzzle she hadn't even realized she was solving. An image surged into her memories. She now remembered everything. "You used to be one of us," she whispered. "You used to be part of the Insurgency. You were part of 3rd Delta. I've heard Anthony talk about you, Sam Beale. They always talked about how you were tortured by the Foundation for weeks for your secrets and never gave up a word. I don't understand." The liar closed their eyes and nodded. "That's true, but I didn't give up my memories because there were no memories to give up." They sighed. "I was deployed to locate an anomaly in the Bengal Sea. Our ship capsized in a storm, and I was dragged into the ocean when my leg got caught on some netting. I drifted in the darkness where the eyes were empty and sunk into the void. They found me months later, and the Foundation recognized who I was and what I could do. They gave me to Green, that witch, and she gave me a new identity, a lie to believe in." They opened their eyes and rose to their feet, approaching Olivia. "Your friend Calvin found out from the journal, no doubt, that clever boy. Your copy only had that entry in it, the entry containing my name. Seeing it for the first time in so many years, it was like coming up from underwater after so long." The liar began unbinding Olivia's limbs. "I've cleared a path to the front entrance. It will be open for another 10 minutes. Once you're out, you'll find a gray van in the parking lot. The doors are unlocked. The keys are in the glove compartment. You'll find instructions, a map, and a flash drive." A flash drive?" Olivia sat up, feeling her extremities tingle with the sudden surge of blood. Her forearm pulsed with pain. "It contains crucial data, including the location of the next target. The archivist." The liar stepped back. "Out of all of us, she may be the furthest gone. Tell your friends to be careful." Olivia nodded, swinging her legs around. She sank to the floor. "What about you?" "What about me?" the liar asked, and then they laughed. "I'm not faultless in this. I may have forgotten my purpose, but it was still me in there making those decisions, doing the things I did. There's nothing left for me out there. If the Foundation doesn't kill me immediately, I'll spend the rest of my life running from them because of what I know. I'm not about to run from the truth. The truth has set me free." They sank back into their chair, laying their weapon across their lap. "Move fast. Your window is closing." Olivia reached out to touch the liar's hand. They did not look up. Turning to go, she spared one last look at them. For a moment, she thought she may have recognized a face. Then she made her way out into the hall and toward the exit. It wasn't until she reached the stairwell that she heard the single, lonely gunshot. Back. Journal entry, the 11th Overseer. The 11th Overseer. 0511 is one of the most interesting personalities on the Council, as they don't appear to have any defined personality at all. The 11th Overseer is often called the Liar, a name given to them due to the nature of their work. They are the individual in charge of maintaining the Foundation's deceit operations. Those departments dedicated towards convincing the world at large that neither the Foundation nor the monsters in her care exist. However, the exact nature of 0511 is still a mystery. At times it seems as if the position has been filled by many different people simultaneously. The reason for this seemed at first unclear. However, documents recovered from several early council meetings indicated that the overseer was a single person, and who that person was surprised even me. According to those documents, the individual known as 0511 is actually an acutely powerful polymorph, one capable of changing their identity from one to another at will. This allows them to act with discretion in situations where it would be advantageous that they not be identified. Furthermore, the name that appears on the official record for that first meeting is none other than Sam Beale, a former insurgency agent who was presumed killed after a shipping accident off the coast of Bangladesh. Now this struck me as peculiar indeed. Why would an agent of the insurgency, an organization known for its policy of suicide over capture against any odds, be sitting on the council of the SCP Foundation? The more I began digging, the stranger the story became. My sources in the area described an incident where a fisherman reported a ship being pulled from the bottom of the sea, and the men recovering the ship finding a person on board alive, despite being underwater for days, if not weeks. The report indicates that the Foundation quickly moved to apprehend the subject, who was not seen again afterwards. 0511 simply appeared on the council afterwards with no explanation. The story continued to perplex me. It was not until I recovered a recording of a meeting between a junior chairman of the ethics committee and the Site 305 director that the truth began to come into focus. According to those men, the overseer was frequently meeting with the overseer known as Green, and the subject of those meetings was the recovery of 0511's identity. However, despite their best efforts, it seems that they were unable to recreate the identity of Sam Beale, but were able to create an abundance of other identities, each aware of and cooperative with each other. And then a breakthrough. By nothing more than chance, I stumbled across a newspaper clipping from a Guatemalan city where one of the known aliases of 0511 had been involved in an incident involving the death of a local politician. There were several witnesses to the crime. However, none of the individuals present seemed to be able to recall any details of the event. This was, I thought, remarkable, as amnestic technology that advanced had not yet been discovered, and I worried that we were seeing a breakthrough in Foundation capabilities. However, that was not the case. Other recovered documents indicate that they were still working on the compound that would eventually lead to the modern A-class amnestic at the time this incident took place. Instead, it is now believed that the reason the witnesses were unable to recall what had happened is the overseer itself, which apparently can exhibit an anomalous amnestic property at will. This at the time was nothing short of revolutionary. Over time, eventually, after the discovery of the compound the Foundation calls Y909, the overseer's active influence in disinformation campaigns began to wane. However, their involvement in organizing those campaigns increased considerably. The Foundation had a Department of Disinformation, but the 11th Overseer completely revitalized the field and created the Department of Public Awareness and Perception Management, with themselves at the head. I'm left, though, with lingering doubt about the nature of Sam Beale's involvement in this case. While it is possible that the inclusion of their name on that first report was simply a mistake or some kind of mocking jab at the Insurgency, who would later go on to claim that Sam was captured and tortured by the Foundation despite evidence to the contrary, this seems like an outcome without purpose, especially considering the great lengths that I or anyone else would have had to go through to get their hands on that document. So I'm left with this thought. Perhaps it is indeed coincidence, or perhaps the person that was pulled from the waters of the Bengal Sea was Sam Beale, and that they lost any memory of themselves in those dark waters for the long time they were down there. Perhaps, in becoming the 11th Overseer, they lost the person they had been, and despite the Foundation's efforts to recover that person and learn what they could from them about the Insurgency, they were unable to bring them back from the dark. And maybe the blank slate that remained when the thing that had been Sam Beale was the perfect vessel for a variety of personalities and abilities, all of which collectively culminated into the identity of the 11th Overseer, who by the time the Foundation realized had assumed command of one of their most powerful departments, had made them all forget they had ever not been there. Back. Step 001/10. Open file. 0510. The archivist. Formerly Diane Walters, a librarian. Caucasian female. Appears to be in her late 40s. Possible strong connection to the Wanderer's library. Extensive knowledge about the Foundation's involvement in previous end-of-the-world scenarios. Supposedly maintains a consistent record of every activity taken on Earth from the moment she took her place on the Council forward. These records are used extensively in the application of the machine beneath Yellowstone. One source identified 0510 as being the most bloodthirsty member of the Council. According to this source, she is obsessed with the perceived divinity of herself and the Council. believing herself to be above any natural laws. In her eyes, normal humans are fodder, a means to an end in reaching some greater understanding of universal truth. Some sources indicate a possible obsession with the idea of omniscience. This has not been verified. Decryption complete. Access log. Chapter 4. The Sphere and the Serpent. Then. In the stillness of the tiny apartment, Vincent Arians sipped his drink. A half-finished bottle and a loaded pistol sat on the countertop nearby. Thin bands of twilight peeked in through the slits of the blinds, illuminating the prone form of Aaron Siegel on the ground in front of him. Arians sat the glass aside and took a long drag on a cigarette, his eyes squinting against the luminescence. A moment later, Aaron stirred. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, one hand wiping sleep and saliva out of his beard, his face puffy and red, turned to face Arians. "What happened?" he croaked. "Where are we?" He looked down at his hands. They were still trembling. "Did it work?" Arians took another drag of the cigarette. Smoke flowed slowly out of his nostrils, catching the light in front of him. He was barely visible behind the haze. "He's dead." Arian's eyes focused on some point in the distance. "It worked." For a long moment, Aaron did not move. Then, suddenly, he slammed his fist into the ground. "Yes!" he hissed through his clenched jaw. "Yes!" Arian's expression was distant. "We almost died, you know." He dribbled ash on the carpet to his right. "Some of us didn't make it." Aaron staggered upright, then fell down with his back against the wall. He held out his hand. Arians passed him the cigarette. "How many?" Aaron asked. "You and I, Felix, Conrad, Ingrid." Arians counted on his fingers. 5 total. Felix has already reached out to researchers at other sites. Some of them are reaching out to us. Everyone is scared. He took another drink. "Thought you might be dead." Aaron rubbed his temples. "I don't remember much." He looked over at Arians. "You look younger." "Yeah, we all do. That water will do that." He finished his glass. "We've got a lot of work to do, Aaron, but before we start, you need to tell me why you did it." Aaron shook his head. "It doesn't matter now. It's done." "F you, it does matter." Something had changed. There was a distance between them. I did things that will haunt me till the day I die. But we did them anyway because we were saving the world. You had the chance to destroy Abaddon, and you didn't. His voice grew hard and cold. You told me to run the moment you activated them. The children. You told me not to ask why, so that's what I did. I trusted you because you've never given me a reason not to. But now I've got several. You need to tell me why you killed Frederick Williams." They were silent for a good long while. Aaron worked on finishing the cigarette. Arians poured himself another drink as he leaned back against the wall. Aaron could see faint pinkish swelling around Arian's eyes. "There was no Abaddon," Aaron finally said. "There never was. It was bait." Arians drew in a ragged breath. "How do you know?" "Because he told me, Vince." "What?" "And when I didn't believe him," Aaron continued, "he showed me." He let the silence speak for him. When he grew tired of what it had to say, he went on. "It was just before the Congo site. I was there, with him." Aaron exhaled. Wisps of smoke swirled from his nostrils, climbing toward the ceiling. Arian said nothing. Aaron examined the cigarette. "I don't know what the hell he is. He was probably human once, maybe, but not anymore. He can do things, impossible things. When the site fell," he closed his eyes. "I watched him level an entire facility, Vincent. One man. That's all it took. That's all Abaddon was." "Why would he?" Aaron's eyes opened. "I think he saw in me a kindred spirit." Then softer. "I watched him press through concrete and rebar as if they were soft, wet paste. I watched a man exhale his own skeleton as a thick yellow fog. I watched a woman's blood solidify into crystal, as sharp as diamond and as brittle as chalk. He let me watch because he knew no one would believe me. He let me watch because I think he wanted to see what I would do. Arian struggled to speak. His voice caught in his throat. So you destroyed him? Aaron was very still. Yes. I knew I didn't have the kind of power I needed to kill him, and he stopped and stood up, searching for another bottle. When he found one, he didn't look at the label. He poured himself another drink. Maybe he wanted to see if I would. Maybe he just wanted to see that power himself. In some of his correspondence early on, he would describe anomalies as glorious. He talked about them like you might talk about a sunrise. I don't know. I don't think it was ever enough for him. I don't think anything was. Aaron finished his drink in a single pull. He's the cancer, Vince. It wasn't Abaddon. It was the administrator. He had to be destroyed. The whole thing had to be destroyed. It was rotten down to its core. He lifted the bottle to pour himself another drink. Arian's breathing was heavy and shaking. It took him a moment to speak again, and when he did, he trembled with a barely suppressed sob. If you knew this whole time, we could have stopped, Aaron. We could have spared them. We could have... Aaron brought the bottle down hard. No, Vince. We needed the children. If we didn't have them, I wouldn't have been able to. Arian's voice swelled with fury. We sliced them open and cut into their effing brains. Aaron grimaced. Arian reached for the counter, steadying himself. I strapped children down to effing operating tables, Aaron. I strapped them down and I helped you carve out every last inch of who they were. They screamed and screamed and we kept carving, and then the screams got softer and softer until they were just tiny, broken sounds, little wet sobs you had to strain to hear. And then one day they didn't make any sound at all, and Arian's voice fell into shaky, wheezing breaths. He closed his eyes and counted to 10. You said Dr. Williams just wanted to see if it could be done, but what about you? He opened his eyes. Why didn't you stop it? I told you we needed it to kill. I don't believe you. Neither spoke. Arians pushed himself away from the counter. Once the foundation collapses, we'll have a lot of work to do. His voice was treacherously calm, like a razor-thin layer of ice spread across the surface of dark water. Felix is assembling the researchers and finding us a space to operate from. They all think the administrator aligned himself with Abaddon. They think you're some kind of hero. They expect you to lead, and that's precisely what you're going to do. Vince. Aaron turned to him, his eyes glassy and wide, as if viewing something from a distance. You saw it too, didn't you? The moment that it happened, that it destroyed him, that moment, you saw it, didn't you? Yeah, I saw it. Wasn't it... Aaron searched for the right word. Wasn't it... It was nothing, Arians replied. Just another body beneath the foundation. Now... Adam spat, wiping cobwebs from his face. You know that I hate bugs, right? Calvin laughed. I can't imagine they're thrilled with you either. The thick morning fog seeped out from between the trees. It gave the forest a dull, amber gold luster. A chittering chorus of insects surrounded them both, as if to berate them for their intrusion. Dead leaves crackled beneath them with each step into the woods. Adam kept mopping away at his mouth. And magic. If I were writing a list of things I'd hate, that's what the list would be. Bugs and magic. So you bring me along on the one mission that has both. He paused to spit out another bit of webbing. Why me? Why not Anthony or Olivia? This seems like their kind of deal. Olivia's busy dealing with the liar. Calvin retrieved the journal from his pocket. He opened it and flipped through several pages. As for Anthony, he's getting intel on the outsider. Okay, fine, but this lady, she's basically some sort of wizard, right? How are we going to deal with that? You've got some sort of plan, yeah? I've got several. Calvin turned the page, reading as they walked. Well, what are they? Most of them consist of shooting her in the face. That's... Adam scowled. That's not a plan. It's worked out pretty well so far. Calvin looked up from the journal, casting a glance back to Adam. And if things get heated, I've got something. A weapon. What is it? Can't tell you. Seriously? Come on, that's... No. Calvin cut him off. I mean, I literally can't tell you. He closed the journal and stopped walking. We're here. Adam's scowl only deepened. He looked around the clearing. I don't see anything. How can you even tell? Listen. Adam stopped. He listened. Silence. You know how the Foundation contains some pretty intense anomalies, right? Things that, if left unchecked, could end the world? Yeah? Adam leaned back against a tree, scanning the clearing. The quiet, the sense of stillness. It was overpowering. Breaking it almost felt vulgar. Right. And you know how the Foundation has existed for, I don't know, maybe only around a century or two? Calvin squeezed the journal into his pocket. Adam nodded. Right. Then here's your history quiz. If the Foundation contained so many world-ending anomalies and the Foundation has only existed for a century, who was containing those anomalies before them? Adam tried hard not to roll his eyes. No one. Anomalies didn't exist before the Foundation. The Overseers created them to gain immortality. Come on, seriously? This is kid stuff. But that's not quite it. Because there are anomalies that predate the Foundation. And besides, how do you create anomalies if they never existed in the first place? Adam folded his arms across his chest and wrinkled his brow in thought. All that's really happened, Calvin continued, walking towards one edge of the clearing, is that the number of anomalies has started to increase substantially. The Foundation didn't create the problem, they just made the problem much, much worse. How? Calvin reached the destination. Two young saplings stood side by side. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and extended his arm out between them. His hand vanished up to the wrist. Adam's eyes went as wide as saucers. Calvin pulled his arm back. His hand reappeared, unscathed. He turned around and held it out for Adam to see, wriggling his fingers. They tugged on threads not meant to be tugged. They tried to use them, even harness them. What the hell is a way? A tunnel between worlds. A piece of frayed, unraveled thread. Calvin faced the saplings, extended his arm again. In order to pass through this one, you need to have the right knock. Adam walked toward Calvin, staring at the space where the older man's arm terminated. Oh, what? Something that opens the way. Sometimes it's just the time of day or something you're carrying. Other times it's a ritual or a word or a thought. In this case, it's a piece of knowledge, something important to you. Calvin looked back to Adam. You'll forget whatever it is when you press through. Think of some tiny piece of information you like knowing, but don't have to know. Then step between the saplings. Also, just to warn you up front, it's a pretty intense ride. Calvin turned and stepped forward. He vanished. Adam stared at the space where Calvin had been for a good long while. Then he exhaled, closed his eyes, and stepped forward. Did he really need to know what Thako stood for? It hit him all at once. Space and matter became as stretchable as taffy. The woods pulled away, air rushed to greet him. It was like he was accelerating through a tunnel at breakneck speed, a tunnel made of light and sound extending out forever. The world roared around him. He tried to talk, tried to yell, tried to scream, but every sound he made was torn from his lips and sent spinning back behind him into the void. Cold, distant stars watched from above and below, and then, as if the universe was a rubber band that had been released, everything snapped back into place. Adam lunged forward, landing on his hands and chest. You all right? I told you it was pretty intense. Calvin reached down to help Adam to his feet. They were inside now. The air was unusually cool. The floor was smooth, flat, and orange. As Adam stood up, he searched the space around them. Adam struggled to find the right words. They were inside a massive office space, illuminated by dozens of long, narrow fluorescent bulbs. Dozens of refrigerator-sized mainframes hummed quietly along the room's walls. Adam didn't recognize the models, but if he had to wager a guess, he placed them as something from the mid-'80s. The sort of the sort that used record-sized magnetic plates for hard disks. Several desks with large, bulky monochrome monitors were arranged around them. Adam even saw what looked like an old microfiche machine. The last time he'd seen one of those had been in his dad's attic. Not what I was expecting. Halls extended from all four sides of the room, leading into additional rooms. At a glance, they appeared similarly equipped. The hallways kept going, extending as far as they could see, or until a piece of equipment obscured their view. Hello? Kelvin started down one of the halls, but didn't leave the entry room. Anyone home? No reply, just the hum of countless mainframes. There should be someone here. This place is... what is this place? Adam approached one of the mainframes, inspecting it. Each machine had a sleek logo, the image of a snake with brilliant emerald eyes and a silver crown. These machines look older than me. They probably are. Calvin frowned, glancing back to Adam. This is part of the library. The Foundation uses it to archive all the works of the worlds that came before. Art, literature, music, written works, printed works, of any kind of information. On microfilm? Adam did not sound impressed. Wait, came before? Yes. We need to find a librarian. This place is effectively infinite. Get lost here and you'll starve before you find another soul. A librarian? Adam was examining one of the computers more closely now. Hey, this one's not running. Yeah, a librarian. They're part of the library. They know where everything... Calvin stopped, turning to face Adam. Wait, what? This computer, it's not running. Adam had already pulled out an unfolding toolkit and was working on unscrewing the front panel. It's plugged in, switch is on, but it's not making any noise. Calvin approached. Don't mess with it. Why not? Hell, why not just destroy them? Adam replied. By the time Calvin reached him, he had already gotten the fourth screw out and was lifting the panel up. That would be very bad, Adam. They don't just use these to archive lost worlds. They use them as backups for information on the anomalies they're containing. If they lost these mainframes, they could lose critical information they need to keep anomalies. The panel slid free. The interior was nearly empty. The wires had been stripped away, leaving only the hard disk's magnetic plate. A dense, winding script of sigils were carved along its surface. As they watched, the plate slowly rotated, despite having no discernible power source. The F is that? Adam asked. Calvin grasped Adam by the shoulder and pulled him back. Don't touch it, he hissed. What is it? It is of Deivite origin. The voice came from behind them. They spun around. Calvin's hand went for the pistol at his hip, while Adam gripped his screwdriver like a knife. The creature stood over them both. Narrow and slender, it wore a robe of shimmering silver. Its hood was pulled across its face, cloaking its features. Still, Adam could make out a hint of its skin. Pale, with a slight emerald tint. It had a rough, scaly texture. Calvin kept the pistol leveled at its chest for just a moment. Then, he slowly lowered it. A librarian. Adam lowered the screwdriver. We're looking for the archivist. She is no longer here, the librarian informed them. Where is she? Calvin frowned. And what the hell is Deivite technology doing inside a Foundation server? Also, the hell is a Deivite? Adam added. She has broken her pact with the serpent and partaken of forbidden knowledge. She has written herself into a story to which she does not belong. As for where she is now, if you seek her, the librarian told them, I will take you to her, down below. Then they descended. Long staircases led to long plains of endless rows of books, art galleries full of strange and terrible works, narrow hallways throughout which tinkling music could be heard. Every door they passed was another universe worth of knowledge, and still further they descended. Adam knew that time was passing strangely here. He could not say how long they traveled or how long they had been in this place. When he thought to look up, he realized he could no longer see the top of the library, and yet still they descended. After a lifetime, the stairs ended. Their feet struck stone again, and the steps behind them disappeared into shadow. The dark was intense here. Even the librarian's torch seemed dimmer and cast less light. They walked in for a while in this dark place, through a massive cavern lined with titanic stone columns that extended up into the black above them. "This is the foundation of the library," they heard the librarian say, the first words they had heard in decades. "These pillars were forged by the serpent itself in the eternity before time. All knowledge rests upon them." Adam coughed. "A snake built this?" The librarian looked at him queerly. "The serpent is called the serpent in your world because that is how it manifests outside of these halls. In here and in the dark endlessness below here, the serpent takes many shapes." "Dark endlessness? What's that?" "You call the serpent what you call it because that is how you perceive it, but that is not what it is. The serpent is the avatar of one of the universal facets of reality, information. The idea that ideas can exist at all, or that all things have inherent truths about them." It paused. "Below here is the emptiness outside of life and death, nothingness. The serpent's silent brother is the lord of that quiet oblivion. Anything that ventures there ceases to exist at all." The librarian stopped and turned to face them. "This foundation is a barrier between that which is and that which isn't. Beyond those doors," it extended a hand, and in front of them they could make out two massive bronze doors through the darkness, "is the source of all knowledge, the center of the foundation on which the serpent built the library. Within this chamber are 3 tomes that mustn't be disturbed. They are fundamental to our universe, and indeed, all universes. You'll recognize them when you see them." Calvin nodded. "Before we go in, I'd like to make a withdrawal." The librarian nodded slowly and pulled back its robe. From within it produced a short metal tube inscribed across its entire surface with runes. "When you brought this to us all those years ago, we were not certain you would ever return to claim it. But you are much different now than you were then, I think." The librarian looked the cylinder over carefully. "There are very few things that exist that our library has no knowledge of. The contents of this container are one such anomaly. I hope it brings you good fortune." Adam took the tube and held it in his hands. When he looked up to speak, the librarian was gone. The torch still hung in the air where she had been. The doors stood before them. "Well," said Calvin, pulling the sidearm and checking the magazine, "let's go." They pushed the doors open and stepped inside. As they passed through the threshold, Adam felt the same nauseating rush as he did when they had first stepped into the way. After a moment had passed, and he opened his eyes. They stood at the top of a rolling hill covered in green grass. Above them was a blue sky dotted with white clouds. Below them was a valley, and in the center of the valley were 2 trees. Under one of them was a woman, sitting cross-legged in a simple white dress. At her feet sat 2 books. A third was in her hand, and she read it as she quietly chewed on a red piece of fruit. The woman didn't acknowledge them as they entered. She had brown hair and wore glasses. Adam guessed she was in her 30s. As they got closer, he could see flecks of gray at her roots. The book in her hand was bound in leather with gold trim and looked ancient. Something was written in small gold type on the front, but neither Adam nor Calvin could make it out. As they approached, Calvin spoke to her. "You're the archivist?" he said. The woman nodded. Calvin nodded in response. He pulled his firearm and leveled it point-blank at her forehead, and fired 3 shots. The activist didn't so much as flinch. After the noise had echoed out of the space around them, she raised her eyes slowly to look at him. Her face was clear of bullet holes. "Do you read, Calvin?" she asked. Calvin pulled the magazine out of the gun and flipped it into his pocket, pulled another from a clip on his belt. "No," he replied. "Can't say I've had much time for reading recently." He cocked the gun and pointed at her again. "So what is this, some sort of incorporeal thing? Do I need sacred bullets to do the job? Maybe something in silver?" He popped off 3 more shots. The archivist didn't look away from him. "I read," she said, closing the book in her hand and settling it on the ground next to a half-eaten piece of fruit. In fact, I read very often. I'm a writer, you see, and the only way for a writer to perfect their craft is to write and to read. She leaned her head back against the tree and was looking him square in the face now. Do you know how much you can learn from reading? I do. It's a lot. In fact, you can learn so much from reading. There's almost no reason to do anything else. You can live 1 billion lifetimes just in books. You can learn everything there is to learn just in books. For example, did you know there's a book in this library written to teach the reader how to allow bullets to pass through their body as if they're not even there? I know. I read that book. I read all the books. She closed her eyes and began tapping her fingers against the top of the thick book next to her. When I heard you killed poor Felix, I'll admit I was afraid. The concept of death is so foreign to us now. It's been such a long time since I've had to worry about it. My task becomes considerably more difficult when faced with the prospect of mortality. I'm a writer, you see, and I have to document everything that happens within the Foundation and on Earth. I can't do either of those things if I'm dead. I came down here because I thought I might learn the secret of immortality in one of these books. As it turns out, I didn't need the books, not at first. Have you felt how time is different here? It's a gift from the serpent. You have all the time you need to learn what you need to learn while you're in the library. She smiled. I've been here for some time. Calvin sighed. So you're going to keep reading until you figure out how to become immortal? Her eyes popped open. Oh, no, certainly not. I've already figured that out. In fact, I've already done it. She motioned to the trees behind her. These trees are special. This one here is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That one, that's the tree of life. The tree of knowledge grants knowledge, and the tree of life grants life. But the serpent is wily. The serpent made these trees and cursed them. You can only eat from one if you've already eaten from the other. That produces a paradox then, doesn't it? How do you eat from one if you can't eat from it until you've eaten from the other, which requires you to have eaten from the first? She uncrossed her legs and stood up. I've been down here for a very long time. I knew there would be an answer here somewhere, some secret that I had missed. By the time I realized there was no secret, I'd read every book in this library. Every piece of knowledge contained here is contained within me. She gestured lazily at the tree of knowledge. I had wondered once about why this tree doesn't bear fruit. It's because the library is the fruit. I had already consumed it. She cracked her neck and rolled her shoulders. I knew the serpent would come down here eventually. The serpent knew that the only pieces of the fruit I hadn't consumed yet were these 3. The book of life and death, the book of things that have been, and the book of things that will be. I imagine it would have very much liked for me not to read these. Her back arched, and they could hear something snap along her spine. It doesn't matter now. The serpent is the keeper of the library. The serpent knows of all things within the library. I know of all things within the library. I am the serpent. They watched in horror as the archivist's skin began to split, starting at the base of her spine and creeping up her back. Her eyes bulged in their sockets, and blood began to seep out of her like water from a sponge. Her mouth opened as if to scream, but instead a long, forked tongue appeared, and then the base of a fanged mouth. With a wet, thick tear, her entire body came apart down the center, and a massive, writhing serpent appeared from within. Its eyes were black slits, and across the ridge of its emerald back were gemstones that dazzled in the ethereal light of the meadow. Floating above its head was a pointed silver crown emblazoned with a dark Ouroboros. The serpent coiled around to face them, but the edges of its mouth turned up ever so slightly in a horrific grin. It blinked, and when it did, they could see the archivist's jade eyes again for a moment. There is one thing that nags at me, it said, lifting itself up to its full, immense height. Is the contents of that tube you are holding, Adam Ivanov? What a queer thing to be unknown to that which gave birth to knowledge. I'll have to find out myself. The serpent's mouth opened wide, its fangs glistening, and it lunged at Adam. The young man had only a moment to duck out of the way as the serpent turned and came after him again, narrowly missing his feet as he rolled out of the way. Adam heard the familiar pop of gunshots and looked to see Calvin firing at the back of the serpent's head. The snake turned, its eyes dark again, and brought its tail down, nearly crushing Calvin in the process. "I think the time has passed for shooting her in the face," Adam shouted as Calvin reloaded. Adam scrambled back towards his feet and produced his own firearm, emptying several fruitless rounds into the monster's side. As he did, he noticed the tranquil valley around them beginning to come apart. Large fissures were forming in the ground, splitting the land and in some places falling away completely. In the exposed holes, Adam could see only darkness that extended on forever below them. Above them, the sky began to lose its blue, becoming a solemn shade of gray. The only color in the world was the gemstones on the serpent's back and its dazzling silver crown. Calvin fired again and then again. The serpent lunged at him, and as he deftly stepped out of the way, he caught the edge of the crown, which pealed like a bell and made the air around them vibrate. As he paused to steady himself, the serpent's tail came around and crashed into him, sending him sliding across the gray grass. Adam fired, and the bullets ricocheted off the beast's back. The serpent turned towards him, its tongue darting out between fangs as tall as he was. Adam stood stock still, his body frozen, and dropped his gun. The serpent began to coil up before him as if to strike, and he could feel the animalistic urges of his body begging him to run, to flee, to do anything to protect himself. But he did nothing. Then he heard Calvin shouting from his right, "Adam, the tube! Open the tube!" His shock was broken in an instant. With a swift tug and a hearty yank, Adam freed the cap of the canister and opened it toward the ground. He felt a sudden weight on the tube as something long, thick, and heavy slid out from it. It was a dark, smooth wooden shaft inlaid with markings and runes burned into the wood. Near its end was a thick metal band, and at its fore was a fierce and menacing spearhead. Eyeing it over quickly, Adam could see the words, "Is the non-believer against whom divinity holds no sway," before he had to duck out of the way again as the serpent came at him. He dragged the spear behind him and shouted panickedly to Calvin. "Hey, I don't know what this is, but I don't think it's going to help," he said. I can't even lift it." At a word, the canister he had deposited on the ground began to spin and shake. Several interlocking sections began to unfold, and more canister seemed to materialize from nowhere. As Adam scurried away from the striking serpent, the canister behind him shaped and folded itself up into a large mechanical rack. Calvin noticed it first and shouted to get Adam's attention. "There, look!" He gestured toward the rack as he reloaded his pistol. "It's a harpoon! Put it on the harpoon gun!" Adam's incredulity nearly cost him his life. As the serpent came at him sideways and knocked him onto the ground, the serpent struck at him, its fangs fighting only soil as Adam dragged the spear through the grass. He heard the crack of Calvin's weapon again and again, but kept his head down as he struggled to maneuver around the collapsing ground beneath him. Upon reaching the harpoon gun, itself a mess of gears, pulleys, and steel, he heaved the spear up on the rack and began to wind it backwards. With the spear in place and the gun loaded, he turned toward the serpent and froze in panic. The serpent had Calvin wrapped tightly in its tail, the older man dangling precariously over the rent ground beneath them. The serpent hissed and smiled again at Adam, and shook Calvin slightly. There, the serpent said. "Let's not be so hasty. You didn't think I wouldn't see how this would play out, did you? I've learned everything there is to learn, Adam. I've seen things that would turn your heart to ice, heard stories of horrors so terrible the very thought would kill you in an instant." Its eyes focused slightly. "I will admit, whatever magic you have in this weapon was tricky. I wasn't able to see it before, but now that I do, well, you know it doesn't matter, right?" "I can kill you right now," Adam snarled, aiming the spear at the serpent's face. "It wouldn't take even a second." "Even if you could," the serpent said, its voice like velvet and smoke. "And you can't? Why would you want to? Do you even know what it is you're doing? Do you even know what you're trying to accomplish?" "Kill the 13 Foundation overseers," Adam said through gritted teeth, his fingers shaking against the trigger. Why? You've twisted the universe to suit your craven desires, Adam spat. You've made a mockery of the natural order. Your influence is a cancer. The serpent seemed to sigh. Fanaticism. Even with all the knowledge in the world, I'll never understand you. With a swift tug, it crushed Calvin and dropped him into the void. Adam stood unmoving, his hand clenched around the handle of the weapon. The serpent began to move toward him. You think you're the first person with dreams of destroying the wicked and terrible SCP Foundation? Be realistic, Adam. I have lived 1,000 lives and dreamed 1,000 more. I've seen this world turned over time and time again and dutifully recorded it all. Do you think there's anything you could do that I cannot foresee? Do you think there's anything that would stand between me and my duty? It flicked its tail toward the harpoon gun. Put that silly thing away. I've eaten the fruit of the tree of life. I cannot die, not now that I've... Click. With a rush, the spear soared through the air towards the serpent, which had gotten close enough as to be unable to move out of the way in time. The spear buried itself in the serpent's skull with a sickening crunch, and the monster recoiled and screamed. Smoke poured from the gaping wound on its head as it thrashed, and Adam had to fall to the ground to avoid being smashed as the serpent's tail swung around and flattened the harpoon gun. The world around him began to vibrate, slowly at first and then building in intensity until the very air seemed to shake. The sky grew black, and thick bands of light began to pour through cracks in it, and the ground below them undulated and churned and eventually fell away. The last thing Adam saw before he was plunged into darkness was the serpent, silhouetted against the falling sky, with a shining silver spear protruding victoriously from its face, like a serpentine unicorn. When Adam came to, he felt cool grass beneath his head. His neck ached, and his limbs thundered their disapproval from his trying to move them as he sat up. He rubbed against his temples, trying to focus. How long had he been falling? But opened his eyes with a start when he heard hoarse coughing nearby. Laying a few paces from him was Calvin, covered in sweat and blood and looking profoundly shaken, but no worse for wear. As Adam approached him, Calvin turned to look at the young man and smiled. "Hey," he said, laughing through bloody teeth. "We didn't die." Adam laughed, taking a moment to survey his surroundings. He found himself on the same grassy hillside from before, but the sky was once again blue, and the grass was once again green. His eyes traced a path of blood up to one of the 2 trees on top of the hill, where a woman in a simple dress was skewered to one of them by a massive spear driven through her skull. Her face was unrecognizable, and her white dress was now stained with her own lifeblood. There was a figure standing over her. It was tall and lean like the librarian, but simpler somehow. It, too, wore a robe that covered its face and obscured its features, but this robe was a much more vibrant green. The figure was stooped slightly, and from where he stood, Adam could see it wasn't looking at the woman impaled on the spear, but the spear itself. Adam helped Calvin to his feet, and together the 2 of them walked slowly and carefully up the hill towards the figure. As they approached, they became acutely aware of another figure, one they couldn't quite discern, standing behind the one in the green robes. Whatever that figure was hurt them to look at, and so, save a few scant glances, they avoided doing so. When they reached the top of the hill, the figure turned to look at them. They couldn't see its face, but something about it felt strangely familiar. "Ah, you're awake," the figure said, its voice soft and smooth. "I had feared the worst. This library contains a great many truths, but little is said about crossing the plane between that which is and that which isn't. In fact, unless I'm mistaken, this is the first time a person has ever crossed that barrier and come back. That is no mean feat at all." The figure in green gestured to the dark figure behind it. "Fortunately for you, the powers that be seem to have determined that it is not time for you to slip these bonds. Not yet, anyway." It tapped a long, gloved finger against its head. "Yes, very rare." Calvin coughed and found his voice. "Who are you?" The figure in green didn't seem to hear him. "This thing you have here. This is a queer thing." It reached down and lay a hand on the spear embedded in one of the trees. "There's something strange about it. The library decided to hold it for you, but the library didn't know what it was. That is very rare indeed." The figure paused for a moment. "Do you know what it is?" They shook their heads. The figure nodded. "This is called the Spear of the Non-Believer. It is an ancient weapon, older, perhaps, than even this library. There are legends that say it was forged in the first thinking, before deciding to deny omnipotence. To stand alone against insurmountable might. It is very, very strange indeed." The figure made a noise that might have been laughter. "In fact, I can't even see it. How strange." The figure looked to Calvin. "How you acquired this? Someone gave it to you, yes?" Calvin nodded. The figure stood back up to its full height. "Now that is peculiar." With a deft hand, the figure reached out and pulled the shaft free of the tree, and with its other, slid the broken corpse of the overseer off the end. It held the spearhead up towards its face, studying it intensely. "Very, very strange. I feel as if this item doesn't care for me at all." The figure reached down and pulled the slim metal canister off the ground, and quickly slid the entire length of the spear into it, which disappeared entirely despite the disparity in the length between the two. The figure turned and handed the canister to Calvin and reached out and took it. "Enough," the figure said, turning back to look at the woman laying in a pool of blood at its feet. "I had known her for some time. When she first entered these halls, she was not so different than either of you. However, her intentions, pure though they may have been, were what led her to this point. Your convictions do truly make you remarkable beings, capable of endless wonders and horrors." I looked back at them one more time, and Calvin became aware that he was being watched. "I wonder where your convictions will lead you." There was a blinding flash of light and a burst of heat, and a moment later they were standing in the forest again. Back. Journal entry, the 10th Overseer. The 10th Overseer. There's a story that makes its rounds among certain groups that deal with the paranormal regarding the 10th Overseer. The story goes like this. Once there was a Foundation researcher who was involved in helping to manage secure data records, the kind that are created by the Foundation's Department of Internal Consistency. These are records with top-level classification, the kind that no individual, short of the overseers themselves, are permitted to see. This researcher was preparing these files for transport, and in doing so accidentally broke the seal on one of the files, which were stored in fused steel lockboxes. They did not view the contents of the file, but for a very brief period of time, the file was unsealed. This breach was reported immediately to the InfoSec administrator, and the file was resealed and delivered to its final destination. No sensitive information actually made its way into unsecure hands. In most cases, this sort of event would result in some disciplinary action, but that would be the end of the story. That is not the end of the story. Instead, the 12th Overseer, a former librarian named Diane Walters, personally saw to it that the individual responsible for the temporary breach was brutally tortured for what they called hostile actions taken against Foundation information security, and used the beatings to try and expose the individual as being a spy. In an apparent bid to try and stop the torture, the researcher admitted to being a spy and was summarily killed. One individual close to the Foundation recalls hearing frequently about how the most frightening overseer was the one they called Green, but the most dangerous was the archivist. The archivist is not just an apparent sociopath, she's also seemingly obsessed with the concept of omniscience and believes that it is her duty to control all available knowledge and use it to meet the Foundation's ends. How Diane Walters became the 10th Overseer was no mystery. Before her affiliation with the Foundation, she was a well-known school teacher with a disciplinary record for harming students who did not meet her ridiculous standards of conduct. She was also known for having near perfect recall and was twice featured on American television as someone who was able to remember anything that they had ever learned. This made her invaluable, and she was recruited by the Foundation sometime in the 1960s. How she eventually became the 10th Overseer is an internal secret, but her presence on the council came as no surprise to those who were aware of her abilities. One report I read indicated that she is also obsessed with the idea that the Overseers are somehow divine, and that their position atop the Foundation's mechanisms was a gift of fate that bestows them with capital reckoning and final judgment on all living creatures. This same report indicated that she is also a shut-in, only leaving her undisclosed estate to enter the Wanderer's Library, where she is a frequent, albeit unwelcome, guest. The library is loath to give up its secrets, but there are rumors that the library considers the 10th Overseer to be something of an abomination, as she does not learn as much as she absorbs information. Despite this, though they have shown themselves capable of shutting individuals out of the library in the past, they are either unable or unwilling to do so in this case. In my travels, I once came upon a portion of a journal that had supposedly been penned by the Overseer herself. In it, she spent a considerable amount of time railing against the ignorant machinations of a failing race, and expressed a truly impressive disdain for other people. At the same time, she also ranted in apparent fear of her own mortality, believing that it was unfair that she should be forced to suffer the same mortal coil as others, despite her being gifted as she is. If I had to guess, should an event take place that would see the Overseer somehow becoming vulnerable, the archivist would revert to those most base fears and retreat to the only location where she might feel safe, the library itself. Based on what I know about the librarians, I do not believe they would hesitate to give her up if that was the case. There's another rumor, of course, one that concerns all of the Overseers, but the 10th specifically. The rumor is that this world has ended many times in the past, and each time the world has been recreated by an impossible machine built by a long-dead race hundreds of thousands of years ago. Each time the worlds were created, the Overseers, who cannot die, do not retain the memory of those events, but the archivist, who has perfect recall, does. If this rumor is true, and the archivist has been alive and aware for much longer than anyone has any right to guess, it is possible that she is more dangerous than I could ever imagine. To have glimpsed the other side of the apocalypse and lived, and to then remember that experience, it may very well make her the most dangerous person in the world. Back